Awesome.
Awesome. Okay, cool. And then let me make sure we are in action. And can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, hello, everybody. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and welcome wherever you are dialing in from. I am so excited to be here with you today. Happy Friday. Welcome to our Legit Leadership Live episode number 5. I am so psyched to be here today with our esteemed guest, Mr. Vincent McDonald. So thank you so much, Vincent, for being here today.
Hey, it's my pleasure broadcasting live from my kitchen.
There you go. And I know, Vincent, I heard that you have some cool things happening in the background. You have some moths, you have some other like species. Can you share with us what's going on your wall?
Yeah, we're the people that, unfortunately, if you come to eat with us, we do have bugs in the kitchen frame. So I've got some bugs from Brazil, as well as a giant clear-winged cicada, which is a reminder that we're at that 17-year point. So we're about to have the locusts come back out again. So brace yourselves.
Brace yourselves. Here we go. Awesome. Well, thank you again for making the time today to be here with us. And I'm so excited for all of us to be able to jump in and have this conversation with Vincent. Thank you to many of you. I see you're joining. If you have some comments, feel free to throw them in the chat. If you have specific questions for Vincent, we have a lot to talk about today. And so, Vincent, if it's cool, I would love to just share. Well, first of all, I'm lucky to know you because our mutual, very good friend and a client of mine, and Kruma Pierre from Eisner Amper, he reconnected us, so I'm glad it was a good match, and I'm delighted to know you and have you in my circle.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Pleasure is mine. So thank you very much.
Totally. Yes. And so, Vincent, before we dive into some of the Q&A, I was going to share a little bit of a bio, but I would love if you can share with all of us here, who are you? What are you up to today? And I can read some of your background info, but tell us who you are.
All right. Well, currently I am I'm the lead for our international strategy for AccuWeather. And my past, if you look on LinkedIn, since we're broadcasting on LinkedIn, is probably the most diverse and crooked path to which lets you know there's many things that you can do. So I started off my career as an Air Force officer and then transitioned because I was on a nuclear missile crew, which is not horribly marketable as an outside job, I found. So even on LinkedIn, there aren't a whole lot of private companies that have an ICBM. So I took off from there and really had a career in media after that in human resources.
Wonderful, wonderful. And it sounds like with your work and from what we've read with AccuWeather, you're responsible now for overseeing global expansion and really developing business strategies targeting key territories all over the world. And also, Vincent, as I've learned from you, you are the now overarching entity above AccuWeather's diversity and inclusion group, and kind of leading the charge there. And it sounds like you've been at AccuWeather since 2009.
I have indeed.
Yeah, with over 15 years of experience that you've brought to the organization. So that's all exciting and amazing. So I'm so glad to have you here.
No, pleased to be here and really kind of happy to talk about that because I know obviously this talks about leadership and so having had an interesting path to different leadership roles, love to talk about that to really kind of give at least my perspective on what I've done and how I got here.
Absolutely. And, maybe we can dive in with that because the purpose of why we started this series with Legit Leadership Live is to be able to ask folks like yourselves who've had a lot of different kind of turns and kind of it's a winding road, right? For some, it might be a very straight trajectory, but I haven't met those people just yet.
Me either.
Yeah. And so I'd love to hear, Vincent, could you kind of let us know in your professional and personal achievements? I mean, you're working on nuclear missiles and then, you've done some work with Discovery and now AccuWeather. What are some of kind of the key leadership lessons that you've learned along the way that have really stood out to you in your path?
Sure. And interestingly enough, all of them really came from the Air Force Officer Training School, and the other jobs helped hone them. So I'll start off with the first thing you learn when you get to, because I didn't go through ROTC and I was not an Air Force Academy grad. So I went through the other little niche, which I guess the best way to describe it to other people is if you've seen Richard Gere, An Officer and a Gentleman, that's what I went through to make it into the Air Force. Except no one yells at you. So that's the first interesting lesson that you learn. There is no yelling. So everything that Richard Gere went through, at least that was the Navy side. There was no yelling at officer training school. So that was fascinating. So they let you learn. First thing about that was to be a leader, you really don't have to raise your voice. Mm-hmm. And if you have to raise your voice, it better be something serious. But the first things they taught you, like the minute you get off the bus, because you do get off a bus, so that part is true.
That part's accurate, yeah.
The bus crammed with other people and somebody with a broken violin and other things, and your stuff from home. But the first thing they taught you when you get off there, they said, when you graduate this, if you graduate, you'll outrank 85% of the Air Force. But 85% of the Air Force will not listen to you. And that's a fascinating thing because it lets you know, even as a leader, even as, okay, I'm a commissioned officer, I'm a second lieutenant, the world is my oyster. No, you had to learn things, you had to build respect. It did not mean that everyone wanted to follow you or everyone would listen to you. Mm-hmm. The next lesson that they taught, because they thought about 4, that was number 1. The next one was broken officer trainees don't graduate. And I thought, well, what does that mean? But this is something you can carry through the rest of your life with you, which was, if you're too injured to carry on your duties, because we had to do physical, we had to do running. So it meant moderation. Don't overdo it. Don't run 100 miles a week so that you can win the road runner officer contest. Because then if you can't perform the parade march to get out of here, because you had to march in a parade where you
where we actually need you. Yes.
If you're too stoved up to do that, you can't graduate. So broken officer trainees don't graduate. So it meant take care of yourself. Don't overdo it. The next one was, and interestingly enough, perception is reality. And then you went, well, what? We were never to appear encumbered. We were never to appear, like, meaning if you had to carry bags from the grocery store, you carried 1 bag at a time. You didn't have 2 or 3 bags and you were stumbling. Your uniform was never to be up because you were in a leadership position. So you're supposed to be telling other people what to do and how to be responsible and guiding them and managing them. That's hard. That's very difficult to do if you yourself don't appear in charge or comfortable.
For sure.
Perception is reality.
Yeah.
Perception is reality.
Perception is reality. Yeah, you're setting the tone.
You set the tone. Mm-hmm. And then the most important one, which we have to carry through, and I've carried through in all of my jobs, and I can tell you how, was cooperate, graduate. And you thought, well, what do they mean? Well, you were assigned as a squadron. You started off with a bunch of people that you did not know. They came from all walks of life. So think of it. Other than college, you don't often always meet people that came from all walks of life. So there were people there from everywhere who were going through, and you were trying to survive together in officer training school because your objective was to get that commission. You were going to get that bar on your shoulders. But the only way to do that was to cooperate with everyone else because you went up and down as a squadron. And that became very, very important as you learn that in business, because you're going to have differences. You may disagree about things, but where do you find some level of common ground because you have a common mission? And we had to recognize we had a common mission. And I'll safely say anyone that didn't recognize that, well, they didn't get to throw their hat up in the air at the end, and the song "Love Lift Us Up Where We Belong" wasn't really playing in the background for them in the old officer and gentleman style.
Right. And you know, if folks are not on the same mission or kind of have that same North Star that they're working toward, what do you think? How does one handle that as a leader? Because I know that if you're just taking your training, for example, that's one thing. But when it's boots on the ground, right, and you're ready to roll, whether you're in business or the military or anything, being able to be on the same page, quite literally, is imperative for success. So, what happens when you see people wavering? How did you manage that?
Well, you know, even to this day, you manage it in that sometimes, you know, we don't share the same vision because we need to clean our glasses a little bit. And that cleaning your lenses a little bit for those of us who wear glasses and those who wear contacts, you know, if you don't clean them, you see the world a little differently. And it's the same really realistically for any mission. if you're doing it. And work are missions. They may be small jobs, they may be large jobs. But I think the reality was we would actually sit down with one another and actually talk about it, because there is a natural avoidance, where the world is sort of somewhat conflict avoidant. Well, I don't want to discuss this with somebody, or I don't want to discuss that. But you have to do it. So from every place that I've been, from AccuWeather even to the military, and again, I will go back to them, because the interesting lesson they taught was they also paired you with people that they knew maybe naturally in society you may not get along with. So I am there with a gentleman who I will just say he had failed. If you fail 3 exams, you're out, which meant you weren't sharing the vision because you had to stay up. So 3 exams could be, one could be physical, they could be mental, as far as the testing that we had to take. So before they would let somebody fail out, they would pair you with somebody to work with to help you out. Now, this guy was about as racist as they come. He did not like Jews, blacks, Catholics, you name it. He had a whole list of people, and he made no bones about it.
Yeah.
They paired us together. That can't be unintentional. It's for us to work together so that he helped us as a squadron, because if he passed, we all passed. If he didn't pass, he was, of course, thrown out. So they left it up to me. Are you going to help him? Are you guys going to work together? We worked together. We stood side by side and threw our little hats up in the air at the end. And you gathered your hat back, by the way, because you paid for that hat and you don't have any money as a broke second lieutenant. So you're looking around trying to find your hat. But that's the perfect example of where we did have to sit down. We had to get, not only get over other issues that we might have, we had to put those to the side. It was, we have a common mission. We still have a common mission. And unless he's ejecting from that mission and saying he's not going to do it, we then had to join together to be successful, and we were. And I'm pleased to say that he went off in the in the ranks and is probably a retired colonel, by now.
Wow. And you had something to do with it, right? It took a lot of, well, let me ask you, what did it take in you to be able to not even look past, but almost deal with, or whatever the term is, like the racist tendencies and such, like a dichotomy of perspectives about the world and people in general? Yeah.
Well, it takes an interesting, viewpoint. And that's where, again, when we talk about this at work, we have to think about, all right, well, what are we really doing? What am I in this for? What is the bigger issue? And I think what became important at that time for him and for me, when you're looking at something like that, it was more important that we moved on in our careers and in our lives than we did in some weird belief systems that actually had nothing to do with reality. So in a way, it helped him overlook that, because he apologized for his behavior, not only to me, but then to others, because he said, I was wrong. And because it actually forced him and gave him an opportunity to really kind of examine, why do you harbor these thoughts? Because any thoughts we harbor that don't make actually any sense, they will come out at some point and they'll hold us back. So he could have been held back and not be a colonel right now, or he could go forward. He chose to go forward, as did I.
Yeah. And I think that kind of connects to something I wanted to dive in with you on. And I'm like, let's just do it. We're here to talk about it. And this, I think what you just shared is one example, or maybe a key anecdote to your experience. But I'm curious to know, with all that's going on, and I mean, Vincent, let's be real, right? The issues of racism that we're dealing with, it's nothing new. Unfortunately, there's a lot to work through. This week was a huge week for U.S. history as well, with the decisions that have been made from a legal standpoint. But I'm curious to know, as a Black man, as a person of color, in an executive leadership role for a world-renowned organization, what are some of the challenges that you've continued to navigate over the years? And with that, I'm curious what you consider some of the biggest challenges now in 2021 that we still have to work through.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest challenge is the challenge that we all have to navigate on a day-to-day basis, and that systemic is systemic, and we call it that for a reason. Things went from bias to unconscious bias because they became such a part of the system that they're almost ingrained. So, for example, I was talking to a friend earlier today about dolls, and her daughter, what dolls do they play with? And so, fascinatingly enough, I've had a friend that they were white, and her daughter liked this little black doll. She had no reason to like or not to. She liked it. But when she went to school and people were, some of her teachers and other kids were curious, why do you have, as a white child, a black dog? So you laugh because, I laugh because it's sad, but it's so systemic in that we should only like, it's whatever looks like us, whatever is this, but a lot of these things are ingrained. So I think what we have to face is we have to turn the mirror around on ourselves. And so, the unexamined life really isn't one worth living. And so we do have to examine ourselves. And by examining ourselves, we find out where there are things. I mean, I certainly have certain biases, and there are things that we hear in the world that where if somebody continually said pepper and salt, we'd wig out because it's salt and pepper. And as simple as that seems, there are also racial, gender dynamics that go hand in hand with those things, as well as biases around who can get married, whatever. So the workplace is no different. So what I have to then navigate is what are mine, and then what are those who are going to face me, because there's a lot of perceptions around people of color. And so with that, I think the biggest thing for me and the biggest advice I give to anybody is, behave as though you belong there, because there is a level of imposter syndrome. I do not go into a situation anticipating that people are going to respond to me differently. And I've lived all over. So people check my background. I got married in the state of Montana, where people say, oh, Montana is this or that. Montana was very free to be you and me. I enjoyed living there. And I got married in Montana, and my wife is white. And so, and we went all over that state. But the interesting thing about that state was people vested in me because, one, I was a veteran. So I'm riding around in uniform. And two, that made me patriotic. So therefore, Montana was and I never insulted them. So it is also even if people are biased and disrespectful of you, if you respond back in respect, it becomes difficult to maintain an environment of disrespect. And so respect creates respect.
Yeah, it kind of engenders itself, right? You got to give it to get it. So
Yes.
I want to go back to something that you just shared about imposter syndrome, because I'm, maybe just making a generalization, but if people look at you, you're a C-suite level at AccuWeather, one of the most renowned companies, in the industry, in the world, and a household name. And, you were with the Air Force, you've done all these things, but Vincent experiences imposter syndrome? No way, So tell me a little bit about what that's been like for you, and kind of what have you learned about imposter syndrome? Because one thing I do know, because I teach a lot of workshops and do coaching on executive presence. And one of the fascinating statistics that I came across was 70% of the world's population will experience imposter syndrome at one time or another. And
Absolutely.
they're like listing Don Cheadle and Maya Angelou and Natalie Portman. I mean, you name it. So what's been your experience with that, and how does Waters?
Yeah. So the experience for that is interesting in that, we all, say comfortably, we share a certain upbringing, which is there is an understanding, and particularly, in Black cultures and things where I was taught, you must be better. You must do really well, give 110% or do whatever. So you had a system set up in your crazy mind of everything had to be perfect. So that meant if you did this, it not only had to be good, you almost had to reinvent it, or as perfection. That's not how the world works, particularly business. In many things, if it's 80% good, it's excellent, and you keep moving. The military was slightly different because it carried over. It helped actually create even more imposter syndrome in that your test scores had to be higher than they were, say, in college. If you got a 90, that's an A. If you got a 95, that's still an A. If I got a 90 on a secret code exam, they tell me I couldn't go to work. I had to stay at home.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah. And I went home once with my crew partner because I got a 90 and he got an 89, and we're looking at each other because we're freshly out of college going, what are they talking about? Well,
right.
We left there each with a 99% average on all of our exams, because you learned then. But that creates then a level of, when you move into the civilian world and other things, unless you functioned at that level in all things, which is virtually impossible,
Yeah.
you're some level of imposter. So what the world became was you had to adjust your thinking to what are we trying to achieve? Did we achieve it? And you might have achieved that with 60% of effort or 75%, but you achieved it. And it also taught you, no matter what, imposter syndrome also implies that you're in everything by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So I tell the world, I play to my strengths, and I find others who support who are strong in where I have weaknesses. I do not have time to sit and develop all of my you just don't. Yeah, well, if you're
Yeah.
not good at language, you will never be good at developing them, but you might be really, really good at interpreting what the meaning of things
Mm-hmm.
are, as opposed to, so you find someone else who can translate.
Yeah, yeah. And I love that because one of the things I think you and I have talked about is I'm a big fan of strengths-based coaching, and one of the
Absolutely.
things in the strengths world as I've learned from my colleagues who are kind of experts in this, they're like, there's no such thing as a well-rounded person. You have lopsided people who make up well-rounded teams.
That's it.
So yeah,
That
yeah.
is it.
I'd be curious to know, as you think about kind of what got you here to where you are today,
Mhm.
what are some of the top strengths or some of like the biggest assets that you think you've been able to cultivate for yourself as a leader, as a high contributing member of the teams that you've been a part of?
I think the biggest thing for me has been adaptability,
Hmm.
because adaptability keeps you from being stuck in any one point in time. And the key example I'll use of this is you all have, and we all know somebody who only listens to, say, classic rock. So I've got a friend, this guy's got his PhD in economics from Wharton, and he's a brilliant guy, nice otherwise, but he's trapped in a moment in time.
Hmm.
And so if you talk about anything else, and I use music as a prime example because it developed over time. It has social norms. It has a number of other things that are included in with it. He's still somewhere in 1978, where or 77, like the last tour that Led Zeppelin did.
Right.
They canceled that tour in Philadelphia, and he has the T-shirt from it. And though a brilliant guy, it becomes you must adapt.
Hmm.
And as the world changes, I remember I was one of the first in one of the companies I ever to have an iPhone, and
Hmm.
because I thought the world is going to be different. Everybody had a BlackBerry, and we were all going to, we were going to stay there. They were tactile. It was XYZ, and I thought we don't go back.
Hmm.
And so the more you adapt to change, which also then means, hey, the workforce is different. Now, women have positions of power and respect. There are people of color there. Sorry, it is what it is. The world moves on. Borders have changed. I've been to Beijing, China almost 50 times.
Wow.
When I grew up as a child, I never knew anyone. The only person we knew that went to China was Henry Kissinger.
Right.
Okay. So the Secretary of State under the Nixon administration was the only person that we knew of that had ever gone to China. And now I can
Hmm.
safely say, I've been there 50 times, and my company uses me. And this is how the world adapts and changes. My company uses me as our lead, as our go-between to China
Hmm. Hmm.
and to the group that we work there. So adaptability, not only for us, but also then for companies. We have to recognize where we're not being adaptable, and and the pivot. And the pandemic has shown who can pivot and who can't,
Yeah.
because we're always going to have some. And this is an unfortunate one, but it's exposed a number of things. It's exposed holes in our system as far
Mhm.
as it's exposed holes in our system as far as who's adaptable and who is not. How do you
Yeah.
pivot when things are not right?
Yeah, the truth comes out, right, when it hits the fan. That's just the nature of the beast, really. So,
Yes.
you mentioned going to China 50 times. I mean, that's fascinating, right? I myself have been there 10 years, 11 years ago. And even then, working as a leadership development facilitator for an organization and with students from 120 different countries. But the facilitation team was myself, and there were some folks who identified as Black, and then some folks who identified as other, and myself. And they would stop my Black colleagues in their tracks, and that was 11 years ago, because it
Yeah.
was a rare sight,
Yes.
in China, and obviously things have evolved and changed. So I'm I'm curious to know, Vincent, in your experience, as being a non-Chinese person, or whatever country, because I know that you travel quite a bit.
Yeah.
What role does cross-cultural competence play, and just kind of cultural understanding? Like, how does that support you, or how do you utilize that in your role at AccuWeather and also your previous roles as well?
Yeah. Well, one thing I will say about AccuWeather and the fact that I get to go there, and it gets to my my other point about respect, is they treat me with respect and always have. And frankly, that's why I work there. So I'm not one of those, oh, I'm just going to say nice things about the company just because,
Yeah.
otherwise I wouldn't mention it. But respect does breed respect. And so when you go somewhere like this, when I go to China, I make a point of I eat whatever is presented to me as far as the food. So unless I'm allergic to it, like if you're allergic to shellfish, well, don't eat shellfish. You're not proving anything to anyone, by doing that. But when you go places, when you go to Germany, when you go to, been to Copenhagen, we have an office in Seoul, Korea, we have an office in Mumbai. Eat what's there, be respectful of the culture. If you have allergies, or perhaps if you're a vegetarian, it's okay to then say you don't want a plate full of meat. But beyond that, if you show some respect, those cultures will then treat you that way. Yes, I am different there because when you go to China, it's 95% Han Chinese, which is very unusual for Americans to see because we're so eclectic. We are a rainbow coalition whenever we go places. But the interesting thing about, the 11 years from when you were there to now was I'm largely viewed as an American. So when you get there, they recognize, oh, this is an American, and they treat you as an American. And I think it is interesting because they do have outer provinces, and you go places where they've never seen a person of color. I was fascinated. They were fascinated with me at one spot where I was because I was the first Black person they saw until a woman with red hair walked by, and then suddenly
And they're like, forget you, Vincent.
It
Yeah.
was highly unusual.
Yeah.
In certain spots of the world. But I think the experience and the lesson that I've learned and that others taught me there was, and I have great friends there and all over the world, were simply that when we treated each culture with a level of respect, like you don't get there and say, oh, we were on a bus and someone was complaining about how the water's not hot enough in Britain or the UK when we were there. And I looked and I said, we're in a tour vehicle and there are people from Britain on here. So you're basically saying in a language they understand, you don't like their country because they don't have hot water. Their water's not hot enough for your showers.
Right.
And there's no point in doing that. You'll miss out on experience there. So when you embed yourself in a culture, in an existence, you learn differently and you're treated differently. If you want to sit on the outside of it and judge it by standards that those aren't their standards. Okay, that's why the world is different, and that's why we all have different strengths. We're not all accountants. If we were all accountants, we might not ever make another Transformer movie. Right. That might not be a bad thing, but we would not have certain things because we're not all the same. That difference helps create things.
Yeah. And, in the spirit of diversity, which I think is something that you're touching upon too, right? We're all different, and that's what makes us interesting. Otherwise, the world, I think, frankly, would be rather boring. And recently, I know that you've shared that you've taken on the role as, supporting AccuWeather's diversity and inclusion group. Yeah. Can you share with us a little bit about why now in your career you're focusing on that, and kind of what is that about, and what are some of your hopes for that that engagement?
Look, it's something that's important. It becomes easy in our day-to-day to overlook because in the world we live in a bubble. And sometimes in our bubble, everything's okay. You're advancing in your career, you're making, but what got you there and what continues, not only just your organization, but society, it's as big as that. It is a level of, we are a diverse, nation. It is a diverse, and we live in global economies. It's a global world. And to not acknowledge that or get rid of some of the because we carry some interesting baggage with us. Like I said, totally. A lot of it is now subliminal and it's underground, and we don't even realize why some of the things we do that we're actually doing. And as a leader, I was pleased that AccuWeather came to me and said, "Hey, would you like to be the executive chair of our AccuWeather Together thing?" Because Oh yeah, heck yeah, because
Mhm.
this is important because when we talk about safe environments or inclusive environments in work, I used to work in HR, so I'm going to safely say I've seen everybody cry. And people want to say this. So even tough, mean people who are, why are you doing this? Is it just about trying to be politically correct? And usually when I hear that term, because I grew up in the incorrect world, where, I had a mother who had an accounting background and she could go to work and her bosses could say whatever to them. So I would then tell to my men friends, I said, you have a spouse? Yeah. What would happen if she came back from work and the following things happened? I wouldn't tolerate that. I said, okay. I said, so what a correctness became is accountability. Now, one
Mhm.
thing can go to extreme or the other, but we have to be held, I think, accountable for helping make an environment good. Because, like I've said, I've seen everybody cry. I've seen
Mhm.
everybody upset, and I mean that literally. In my office, men sobbing because they weren't getting respect, people crying because they did not feel they were treated properly.
Mhm.
And since we spend more of our time at work, the only thing we do more of than be at work is actually sleep.
That's
Okay?
pretty much
And
it. Yeah.
we actually almost do them in equal amounts. So if you figure when you're not working, sleeping, then that other time is left for you. You're spending a lot of time at work. You've already accounted for about 16 hours out of a day that's 24. You
Mhm.
know, so you got about 8 hours for yourself. So work has to be a better environment. And there are a lot of the old, systemic things that lurk around. And if they're not in my organization, then who else do we do business with? We want to make sure we're doing business with the right people. Are we supporting female and minority owned, institutions? Because I view AccuWeather, and what I liked about it when I got here is we're a come as you are party. And there aren't enough places that are a come as you are party, meaning come as
Mhm.
you are. There is a place you. It was more about the quality of my work than the color of my skin or my orientation or my religious background that had anything to
Mhm.
do with my work. And that's how any place should be. It should be safe for people to be there and comfortably work because that's just what makes you a better company.
Sure, sure. And I know you have extensive experience working with human resources and people operations. And the work that I do, as you know, is around leadership development. It's coaching and really how do you create an intentional culture for the workplace where people actually want to come and they feel supported and they deliver, with excellence. And I'm curious to know and I know you're talking about respect as one key element,
Right.
as it relates to your understanding of human resources, human dynamics in the workplace and org culture, because I know you've had your fair
Yeah.
share of experiences there. What do you think are some of the essential ingredients to create a place where people actually want to show up and stay and deliver their best work?
Yeah. So the most interesting thing about that is, and having been in HR, it is simply not to let that be the responsibility of HR. Everybody diffuses this responsibility simply to the human resources department. And I
Mhm.
will safely say, I agree. Any place you meet, if the HR department was terrible or you had a bad interview, the company's bad. They reflect the company.
Yeah.
But it also reflects if the company thinks that only human resources are the keepers of their ethical background and that the executives can go and do whatever they want, that the team members don't have to
Mhm.
be uphold that. It is the responsibility of everyone.
Mhm.
And when it particularly leadership, which is why I'm glad my company made me the executive chair of our AccuWeather Together thing, because it shows we're putting skin in the game. We're taking the time of an executive who also, by the way, has a leadership team of other executives, including the president of the organization and the CMO and the chief product officer and the head of HR supporting that,
Yeah.
because that shows skin in the game. It's not then left to, okay, well, the HR coordinator and two people from customer service are running these, and that's not a slight to them, but it's like you do not. It has to have leadership as a part of it,
Yeah.
and that's where responsibility should not be so diffused out, it needs to be greater diffused, not just within HR to be the keepers of the company's ethics.
For sure. Yeah. I have to say, in all the work that I've done over the years, that's been the one biggest kind of consistent theme where it's kind of a two-way street. If I share with folks, the work that I'm involved in, so they're like, oh, you're in HR. I was like, No, actually, I'm not. I love partnering with HR professionals, but then when I hear from the HR professionals, they're like, Raabia, they think it's all my job or my team's responsibility, but culture is
Yeah.
everybody's. So I think yeah, you totally hit on something that has been I feel like we're making moves and evolving that mindset, but there's still a long runway to actually get there.
No, there is, because we have to have an awareness and see that, because I think there's a confusion that bottom line simply comes from still using industrial revolution techniques
Yeah.
to empower. Because think of it, we
Yeah.
really do everything down to like review systems, how much you produced. Did you make 50,000 widgets today? Because we
Yeah.
had to make 50,000 widgets, but it's like humans are making these. You
Yeah.
know, and when they say, "Oh, the company decided," no, the company are people, and there are only a handful of people who make certain decisions. So don't say the company decided; say who decided it. And so as a part of that, we have to recognize that these are we are made up of people, and that to move things, and to do it with people, we have to account for things in humanity. And part of things in humanity are we have children, we get sick, all
Mhm.
right. Sometimes we burn out. Minimals, we burn out. We can't work like this. You can't work like it every day. And companies have to realize that, because again, it's not the concrete jungle. You can read all of those old books; they're out there. They still exist. I have people to Google all of them of what work life was like. When at least at my age, when our grandparents went off with little mining helmets and
Yeah.
selling fruit and everything else like that. That was a hard life, and it was not a great way to work. Um,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
there's no point making modern day places essentially coal mines.
Yeah. Yeah. And on that note, I wanted to kind of get your take on with the shift of management styles and how we do things and how we take care of things generationally, from what I've learned. And I co-facilitate oftentimes or facilitate workshops on multi-generational leaderships with some partners of mine. And one of the fascinating kind of pieces of data is that this is the first time in all of history that we have 5 generations working side by side with one another.
Yes.
And I'm curious to know, with kind of what you're sharing on the differences since like past generations, how have you kind of encountered that in the workplace, and how do you suggest leaders embrace that as opposed to kind of solve for it, because it's here to stay for some time?
It is, and I think that comes with we're going to have to overcome some of our generational biases, and some of those are interesting because every generation believes that the generation behind them is lazy. Okay, so so boomers think I'm lazy. I think Gen Y is lazy. And it just goes down. Then millennials and millennials think Gen Z are lazy.
Right.
Okay, let's stop that. We were brought up differently. So since my generation was a little closer, who had parents whose grandparents then went through the Depression, we behaved in a certain way. Grandmother would not throw away anything, which is the reason why I have a lot of bugs and things in my house, because they never threw it away. We inherited it all.
Don't blame it on your grandma.
All right, it's me. It's really me. But it gets down to that adaptability thing, and how we brought and aligning to a common mission. Because when we worry about it, I'm here to safely say there is absolutely positively nothing lazy about millennials. We raised them. All right, my generation raised them. Bright, capable. There's absolutely nothing lazy about about the boomers. There's nothing lazy about Gen X. I'm Gen X. Blah blah blah. All you wanted was money. XYZ. We were raised differently, but that is the same for any level of diversity. There is diversity in age. And so when we have these multi-generational groups there, we all have something different to offer. And that's why I say adaptability becomes key,
Yeah.
because the generations that are out now are technically more savvy than the ones ahead of them. And we need that to rely on that. Certain innovations are going to come from this, but there's a certain business acumen and savvy that we all share something. So it's like you go to your grandmother to find out certain things, right? And you ask them. I'm never going to ask the younger, perhaps some things, but it's that shared. That's what makes society, right?
Mhm.
Somebody's the cobbler, somebody's the this. That's how I view it at work around the age difference. And until we get over that, we're always going to create some issues with it, but I think we're moving more beyond that. The pandemic's exposing more of that. So
Yeah, totally. You can't hide when the light is shined on it.
no, can't hide.
Totally. So as we kind of come to a close, I can't believe that it's already 12:43. I mean, where has the time gone? So I have to ask you something, Vincent, because I know you got a fresh sense of style. We've talked Thor and Norse gods. We've talked music before, and the art. Sometimes you have these incredible backdrops of art in your Zoom background. Could you share with us a little bit about, from a arts and culture, music, whatever it is, kind of like standpoint, what are some of the key either artists or kind of who are the influences in your life that influence your sense of leadership style and just how you show up on a day-to-day?
No, well, you really can learn something from anyone and everyone when you stop to do that, because I grew up a lower middle class kid, so you may not get to rub elbows with certain people, but my uncle was an artist, and so he loved to draw in his spare time. So he was a painter. So when you're a little boy and you're getting books of not only then African art, but then Rembrandt's, and he's painting portraits of people in town, and calligraphy. So he would get me use his calligraphy tips. So I'll tell you, it's exposure to other things, which becomes then that adaptability. You might not like it, but you need to at least experience it to know why you don't. It's not just, oh, I looked at it and I don't like it. So for me, the influencers, when you start to look at things like art, are not necessarily people that others might recognize. So one of them started off with my uncle. So my uncle, his nickname was Mickey. Who was really an influential guy in town. You'd go to the barber shop. He had made their sign in calligraphy. You go to someone's house. He painted the portraits for their children. So he gave me books on Michelangelo, Rembrandt, James Baldwin. So he covered the spectrum because we were diverse in our upbringing. But I would say that when it comes to anything, even like music, you move from two things like electronica. Why? Because it's different. But then Nordic electronica, you think, well, why? Because they have a different view of the world. Yeah. So when you look at the days, concepts like hoogla, where you're in your house just with you and your friends and low lighting and things. So it's embracing good elements of the world that can help make my life better. So if I talk about single point influencers, there are many. They're more day-to-day people. Like you influence me in that. I'll tell you this now because I've never told you before. You have a very organized and regimented, like a good, really good organizational looking view of the world.
Thank you.
That's it. It's impressive because there's where my weakness is. I couldn't send out a message reminding everybody the meeting was today, at a certain time frame. Mm-hmm. But you get that. So I try and tell people that so that they're not looking for something like if I said, oh, it's Idris Elba. Or it's the Dalai Lama. Well, you're probably not going to get a chance to meet those people. You can read their writings or something else like that, but it becomes, there's more obscurity. There's more day-to-day things. These bugs are works of art, right? that sit behind me. They are in themselves, like nature is naturally like that. So it's more a collection of things and trying to be as well-rounded. You mentioned not well-rounded in I'm not going to be able to accomplish or do everything by myself, sure. But certain philosophies. So I will read, and I'll throw out one, like Stoicism, like the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. Fascinating to actually sit down and and read, what the Stoics thought. How did the Stoics believe? Whether you embrace it or not or do it is a completely different thing, but it becomes part of the day-to-day element. So it's like if somebody steals your coat, well, they needed it more than you. Don't worry about it. And those are fascinating, from yoga down to like breath control. A lot of life, you feel stressed when you're not breathing right. Sit up straight, breathe a little differently. So it becomes more things like, so I would encourage everyone really to explore and find out what makes you tick, because we are different. I treat everyone how they want to be treated, not how I want to be treated.
Totally. I appreciate that. And it sounds like throughout the journey of your life, you've picked up little pieces from kind of people have crossed your paths along the way, or some you maybe sought out intentionally, but maybe when you kind of stand back and get the bird's eye view, it's like a mosaic of really, really beautiful learnings and things and experiences.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Look, it really is, and I would say never stop. You're not done.
Mm-hmm.
And at least that's worked for me. I'm not done. So I used to say whenever I would travel, I would try and meet 5 new people whenever I was there.
Mm-hmm.
And that was important, and that became a goal. That was you meet 5 new people, and they were 5 new people with different backgrounds. So each time I went to China, I would meet 5 new people. Sometimes I met 10, but I would try and meet 5 new people.
Yeah, I love that. One of the quotes that I love, I forgot exactly how it said, but it's like your future success is sitting at the edge of your comfort zone. Like just expand
Absolutely.
your horizons. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's my last question for you, Vincent. Let's say if you had to kind of fit on a bumper sticker your message to the world as a leader, or kind of, I don't know, a quote that sticks with you, or just kind of what's Vincent McDonald's take before we sign off, what would that be?
So let's see. We've got to make it bumper sticker size. So
We can go longer if you want.
Yeah. So I don't want it too tiny, so people can't read. Have to be able to read the font. So you have to be too close to the
fine print. Yeah.
So I guess my biggest thing would be to say that leadership, you lead people, you manage functions. Mm-hmm. And people, when you lead people, and you usually lead them by example, you set the vision and you have to let people do something. So leadership is not, if you're micromanaging anything, if you've then slipped into something else. And so, you lead people, you manage a function. Mm-hmm. And so, and leadership is simply being there. You're supposed to be in the forefront, and the forefront is holding up a sign saying, let's keep going north. And people may have various ideas of how you get north. As long as we're still going north, you're going north. Right? Mm-hmm. If you draw back, I only want to go north this way, and north, they won't know that's then northeast. But if the sign says, and you're the sign bearer, you're the barrier of the vision. You're the keeper of that.
Yeah.
And it becomes, nobody wants to be told what to do every waking second of their day. And that's not what leadership is about. So I think that's where the confusion is. So that's what gave me a second to think about how would I best summarize that. But you lead people and you manage functions. You don't manage people. People can manage themselves. You lead them. You lead other adults.
I love that. I don't have a car, so I wouldn't put it on a bumper sticker of mine, but I definitely wear it as a
t-shirt.
Yeah,
totally. Coming your way. Coming your way. I live in a college town. All we do is make t-shirts.
That's perfect. Well, Vincent, I cannot thank you enough for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to join us and share your insights and your learnings. It's always such a pleasure and a treat to be able to chat with you. And thank you. Thanks so much for being here. It means the world to me. So I really appreciate it.
I am honored to be here. I can't thank you, and I can't thank enough those who decided to come out to hear us talk back and forth. These are very important, and so I am very happy to have been here. So I can't thank you enough.
Awesome. And thank you to everybody, of course, like Vincent said, who's taken the time out of your schedule today to join. Stay tuned for episode 6 of Legit Leadership Live, coming to you next month. I can't believe it's almost May 2021, but it's happening. So I wish you all a great weekend, and reach out with any questions. So thank you all, and then we'll see you soon. Take care. Thank you, Vincent.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye.